The initial idea of extra time at home was a welcome respite for some, but transitions are never easy, especially one with so much uncertainty. Now, as we look toward finding our next normal, our post pandemic life, experts say some anxiety is bound to hit again. It's the topic of today's Heart and Soul Connections. Joining me, Sylvia Williams, Michelle Hutchison, and Nancy DeBoer of She Leads Michigan. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Be here.
Michelle, you are a master's clinical social worker in the field of education with an emphasis on building neuropsychological resilience in the brain. So I really want to start with you when we're talking about COVID and the impact that it's had on our personal lives, in addition to our professional lives. So as we look to this next normal, maybe getting back to a normal life again, are we going to flip the switch back to our 24/7 lifestyles?
Such a great question, Julie. The hope is that in this pandemic time, we actually would take the opportunity to slow ourselves down and really look at the way that we function individually and corporately as a society to recognize the impact on our brains and how it can be good and isolating at the same time.
Yeah, you mentioned isolation. Nancy, we've talked quite a bit about the isolation and particularly the impact on our senior community. How do you see this as we transition to our next normal?
This has been such an unusual time, Julie, with elderly people being isolated, lack of communication with each other, and that it's all been out of their own control. They didn't have any way to connect, and it was just taken away from them. Very hard.
Absolutely. And, and we talk, of course, about our seniors, especially those who maybe live alone or in senior homes where they weren't able to have visitors. Of course, we have a number of people who perhaps were isolated, those who are single or maybe single parents. And certainly this was a particularly difficult time for them when we were quarantining at home or maybe not out and about in groups as much. Sylvia, what are your thoughts on this and this isolation that it's caused?
The isolation has been, in some instances, detrimental, but I think we need to consider even the children. The young people have been affected by this. All of this, everything, because everyone has been affected by this. We are a society where we've been isolated in terms of technology. And then you had the pandemic where you couldn't go outside of your computer. And so it has weighed very heavily on society as we can see when we listen to the news.
Absolutely. I mean, we've all been connected by technology. We're connected by technology right now, recording kind of COVID style from different locations, but that technology is not the same as being together with someone in person. Michelle, I imagine, though, that not all of this has been negative.
Yes, Julie, I'm so glad you said that because there are a lot of people who have benefited from the slowing down of the pace of our society and the expectations that we put on one another. And that can be really good for our neurodevelopment and the development of relationships.
Do you think we'll bounce back, Michelle? We've talked about this before. I mean, can we bounce back from this?
I absolutely believe we can bounce back. We know that our brains can grow and change. And so it's just understanding that we have to come back to a balance in brain chemicals in the way that we relate and connect. But absolutely, we can bounce back and come back even better and stronger. And, one of those ways that we talk as women of faith about bouncing back is through the use of prayer.
Yeah, the use of prayer is so interesting. Sylvia, you lead for Michigan the National Day of Prayer, among many other things that you do. Talk to us about prayer. How, for you, is prayer a part of this kind of this idea of returning to normal? How will that help people?
Prayer has been the answer for many during the pandemic, Julie. It has helped people to battle fear of the unknown, fear of not being in control. It's helped people battle anxiety and hopelessness and even isolation. Initially, when we first went into the lockdown, people rejoiced because they were able to spend more time with God in prayer. And then very shortly thereafter, we realized it was a necessity in order to make it through this. We were going to have to pray. So many people have discovered that prayer is the key to unlocking God's peace to help sustain them during these uncertain times.
Nancy, last question to you. What do you think that this time has done as far as building connections? I know we've talked about kind of this transition that we all had, over a year ago into this more, technological world to be able to connect. What do you think will happen as we start to be able to connect again in person?
We kind of have to rediscover communication. I have heard it described that people who had a little bit of a crack in their relationship turned into a chasm during this. And we have to address those kind of things as we go back into regular world. And I do think the rhythm of regular life will help us also develop more of who we are back into circulation. But we want to retain the good that we learned and the depth of some of the relationships that we've developed during this time.
Absolutely. Nancy, Sylvia, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your insights. To hear more from the women of She Leads Michigan and to connect with them, head to our website, wlaj.com/expertconnections. Just click on Heart and Soul Connections.